Welcome to the Macroeconomic Policy course on Moodle. As you know, the lectures are going to be available online on Moodle on this platform, and we'll also be having tutorials on Teams. This week's lecture is going to be about an introduction to the module, its content and the assessment criteria, the references that I would like you to use. And also the second part of the lecture is going to be about a review of the ISLM model, the original one, the traditional one you have been introduced to in macroeconomic theory, and that we're going to take as the foundation for us to elaborate a much more complex model in the next few weeks. Today we'll be starting with the introduction of flexible prices to the ISLM model. For those of you who haven't taken a macroeconomic theory module before, so you don't know about the ISLM model yet, I would advise you to read Gregory Mankew's Macroeconomics chapters 3, 11 and 12. Those will be giving you an introduction to the ISLM model in much more detail to what I'm going to do today. So what is our course going to cover in the next 9 weeks? First, as I said before, an introduction to the original, the traditional ISLM model, but now with flexible prices. You will see very soon that this is a very narrow model. It's not enough to understand what's going on in economics. So in lectures 2 and 3, we'll be adding more complexity, more realism to the model. In lecture 2, we'll be adding not just flexible prices, but also the production sector in the economy through an AS curve, an aggregate supply curve. Then in lecture 3, we'll be adding on top of that the government budget constraint. So we will have a much more comprehensive model in which, yes, we'll have spending through the IS component, the monetary sector through the LM component, flexible prices, production with an explicit AS curve, and also the government. So we'll need to pay attention also to deficits and surpluses by the government. The next 4 lectures are going to be about policies, the main economic policies run by the government or the central bank, in particular fiscal policies and monetary policies. In lecture 4, we're going to see how these two policies are coordinated, if they are, in some countries, and which one is calling the shots. Either the Treasury, we'll call it fiscal dominance, or the central bank, we will call that monetary dominance. Lecture 5 is going to be about one of the major variables or indicators used by central banks in order to guide their policy decisions. That's inflation, but also we'll cover deflation and the different types of deflations that we can find in our economies. Lecture 6 is going to be about fiscal policies, how to measure the fiscal policy essence in the economy, and debt sustainability over the medium to long term. Lecture 7, specifically about monetary policies, monetary policy strategies, monetary policy rules, and we're going to apply these all to understand the ways in which the Bank of England makes monetary policy decisions. The last 2 lectures are going to be devoted to a very important agent in the economy, which is the central bank. In lecture 8, we're going to study the relation between the central bank and the government. This is called central bank independence. And in lecture 9, we're going to specifically devote the whole lecture to which are the policies that central banks implement in times of a severe crisis, let alone a financial crisis. In some cases, such as in the last 2 crises, COVID-19 and the global financial crisis, central banks have stepped into the markets and provided extensive and generous lending to the banking sector, acting as a lender of last resort. We will study which conditions should be met for the central bank to implement this role properly and correctly. Let's make clear which are the course learning outcomes and the assessment criteria. As you could tell when I described the course overview before, we're going to devote 3 lectures to the building up of a more comprehensive model of the economy, the extended ISLM model with the production sector, flexible prices, and also with the government. So the first thing you need to do is to show that you understand the dynamics in this model, the foundations of this model in detail. So yes, you need to understand the ISLM model fully, because we will be applying this model later on in the module, in the policy lectures, in order to analyze the effects of monetary and fiscal policies. So I will be asking you to concentrate in the first three lectures in the understanding of this more comprehensive model, the extended ISLM model, and to assess the effects of policies in the short and in the long run. This is very important. It's not just enough to tell me what's going to happen immediately after the government or the central bank changes taxes or interest rates, but over the medium to long term. So again, a second very important aspect you need to take into account is that it is not enough to work with the traditional, the original ISLM model that you have been using so far in macro theory, for example. I will be asking you to use specifically this extended ISLM model with flexible prices, the protection sector, and the government as well. So please do not just use the original ISLM model, nor the agri-supply or the agri-demand model. Then you need to be aware of the current major policy debates in macroeconomics. For example, in the context of COVID-19 crisis, both the government and central banks, they have expanded spending and the amount of money in the economy, respectively. So I would be expecting you to use this model in order to assess the effects of these policies over the medium to the long term in terms of output, unemployment, interest rates, and inflation. So regarding these major policy debates that I want you to be aware of, there are always or usually different economic plans, economic policy options available for the policymaker to make. So I want you to be aware of these different options and again assess which one is the best in terms of the effects of each policies over the medium to a long term. In order to do this, you will need to access specialized information, to assimilate technical information in order to make your own judgments on the effects of such policies. And of course, I would be expecting you all to be proactive in the discussion of these topics in the weekly tutorial sessions. As to the course assessment, 100% of your final mark is going to be given by the final examination. There are no essays or coursework in this module. And the structure of the exam has been the same for a few years now. You can check the structure in past papers or module, if you like. The exam consists of 4 questions. Question 1 will be compulsory. It will be on the extended ISLM model that I've been talking to you before. And then you will have to choose 3 other questions out of 7 or 8 options. All of them are going to be essay questions, very open answer questions. So the questions are going to be covering different topics, all of them covered in the syllabus of the course, and some of them intentionally will be connecting different topics addressed in the module. So you won't find this type of a question per week lecture type of exam. That's not what I do. That's not the purpose of my exams. I want you to use all the concepts, theories that you have learned throughout the course in order to answer the questions. So it won't be enough to prepare for a few questions. You won't get them right, because as I said before, the way the syllabus is built up is that first we cover the model, the extension of the ISLM model, and then we use it as a founding block in order to assess economic policies, fiscal and monetary policies. That's the reason why you will need to prepare for the whole module for all the lectures in order to have your answers right. And indeed, yes, you are required to and requested to explain the concepts in detail, very comprehensively, but also we're expecting you at in the questions also to add a sort of a critical assessment of policies. If I'm asking you for the effects of monetary policies in the last, in the global financial crisis, yes, you have to make a description of those policies, the effects of the policies, and if you wish, at the end of your question, I'm more than happy for you to include a critical assessment of those policies. So again, this is not just about repeating what I'm about to tell you today and in the next few lectures, but for you to critically analyze these policies and make your own assessments. As regards the recommended textbooks and readings for this module, there is no single textbook that covers the whole syllabus. So we will have to use different textbooks and plenty of other readings in order to address the topics we're going to cover in the lectures. The textbook that covers the most of the first part of the module, the one devoted to the ISLM module, is Macroeconomics by Maurice Perlman. This is an excellent textbook, very brief and really good, but it's very hard to obtain. It's not very well distributed. So you can find it physically at the LSE bookshop in London, or you can find it secondhand online. So for those who can't access this textbook, there is no problem whatsoever, because you can find in Gregory Mankew's Macroeconomics a good alternative to it. Actually, Mankew's chapters that I mentioned before, you can have an introduction to the ISLM model and its application as well. And there are also plenty of other chapters in Mankew's devoted to specific issues regarding economic policies, targets, instruments, and so on. Which edition can you use? Well, any edition. It doesn't have to be the latest, but specifically I'm going to refer to editions 8th, 9th, and 10th in the module. But again, you will be given access to many other readings, academic articles, reports that I will be putting on Moodle on weekly basis. And you are very much encouraged to follow the most important macroeconomic policy debates that we are having at the moment, specifically the effects of the responses given by central banks and governments to the COVID-19 crisis, because you will be, or we will be using these case studies in the discussion of these topics in our weekly tutorial sessions, and you will be expected to use examples and case studies also in the exam. Let's start with Lecture 1 today with the review of the basic ISLM module, to which we're going to add only one innovation today, which is flexible prices. In the most basic version of the ISLM module, the economy consists of two sectors only. The IS curve represents the spending side of the economy, spending made by both the private sector and the public sector. So it's consumption, investment, and public spending. The other sector is the monetary sector, which is addressed by the LM curve. It's the monetary side of the economy made of the supply of money and the demand for money. But critically, there is no production sector in this model. There is no explanation as to how production is made, why we have an X level of output, why output is increasing or not. It's all about the spending and money. And also, very important to remember, in this very basic ISLM model, we don't need to make a distinction between real and nominal variables. Why? Because the model is very much focused on the very short term. In the short term, prices are said to be rigid, or if not totally rigid, very sticky. So you don't need to worry about changes in prices. That's why there is no distinction between nominal and real variables. The first thing we're going to do is to explain the basic ISLM module, but with flexible prices. So with no money illusion at all. We will allow now for prices to change. So we can have either inflation in the economy or deflation, and we should be able to incorporate those phenomena into the model. We're going to assume that agents act in a rational way, meaning that they make their economic decisions about spending, for example, according to the real purchasing power of their income, and not by just temporary changes in the nominal income. By doing that, we say that agents do not suffer from money illusion permanently. They may make mistakes in anticipating inflation or deflation, and that's fine, but they will learn from those mistakes and they will try to discount the effects of changes in prices, either inflation or deflation, when making their major economic decisions. That's what we call the no money illusion hypothesis. So yes, inflation may occur and deflation in the economy, and agents try to discount the effects of inflation and deflation on their purchasing power, so they can plan for their own spending decisions better. Let's start with the description of the model in more detail. So, starting with the spending sector of the economy, represented by the IS function, we will start by introducing investments and savings. Investment is here private investment, so it's the private sector investment made by corporations, by companies, which is going to be a function of interest rates, ceteris paribus, of course. So given that all the other variables affecting investment decisions are steady or constant, so for example, expectations about the economy, profits, business confidence, the political and institutional stability in the country, given that all these variables indeed affecting investments are steady, then we will say that the higher the higher interest rates are, the lower investment decisions will be. Why? Because interest rates are going to be a proxy of the cost of borrowing for companies. And which interest rate? Well, it's going to be a long-term interest rate. Of course, investments take some time to materialize, so we want to take into account a medium to a long-term interest rate in order to calculate borrowing cost, the borrowing cost of our decision, of our investment decisions. These long-term interest rates are very much affected by market expectations on inflation or deflation. That's very important to notice here. So indeed, the expectations by the public on the future of inflationary trends or deflationary trends will be affecting investment decisions via changes in the cost of borrowing, by changes in long-term interest rates. Another very important thing for you to remember is that since we are adding flexible prices to the model, now we need to make a difference between real interest rates and nominal interest rates. Real interest rates are the difference between nominal interest rates, market rates, minus inflation. So adjusted for inflation or deflation. So say that you are operating in a country, say in an emerging country with some inflationary issues in the past, and still at present time. So inflation is around 10%. Say that nominal interest rates are around 12%. Well, what you should be doing is to calculate the profitability of your investment decision according to the real cost of borrowing, which will be measured by real interest rates, which in this example would be 12 minus 10 would be 2% real interest rate. That's the parameter you're going to take into account in order to make your own calculations about the profitability of your investment. What about the shape of the IS curve? Well, since there is a negative relation between interest rates and investments, it will be a declining line with long-term interest rates. We'll see that in a minute in the next slide. Here you have the graphic representation of the investment line, with real interest rates on the vertical axis and investment spending on the horizontal axis. So let's start with the first line, capital I0 for investment at time 0. And interest rates here are represented as small caps I. So any change in interest rates will mean that we are in a different point along the same investment line, I0. So with lower interest rates, lower borrowing costs in real terms, we'll have a higher investment. What happens when any other indicator or factor affecting investment changes? So say that it's not by changes in interest rates, but anything else. As I mentioned before, it could be expectations, profits, consumer sentiments, anything that changes the perception about how the economy will be in the future. That will produce a shift of the line, of the red line, towards the right if a positive shift, or towards the left if a negative shift. So say, just for the sake of the explanation, that there are better expectations for the economy, for businesses. So corporations are expecting higher profits in the future. Then we will have a shift of the investment line from capital I0 to capital I1. So for the same level of interest rates as before, I1, now we have a much greater level of investment spending. Why? Because expectations in the economy are much better than before. What about the slope of the line? Well, that will be given by the sensitivity, the elasticity of investment to changes in interest rates. The flatter the line, the more sensitive investment will be to changes in interest rates. What about savings in this model? Well, savings are also an endogenous variable. They are explained within the model. They are a positive function of real income. So the higher the level of real income, the higher savings will be. Why? And again, this applies to the private sector savings, households savings, because total savings are just the difference between real income minus consumption. So indeed, we take into account changes in inflation or deflation, and we make our decisions as regards savings according to the purchasing power of our money. So we take into account real income rather than just nominal income. That's very important to remember. And yes, savings are determined within the model. They are positively related to changes in real interest rates. So the higher the remuneration, the interest rates paid on savings, the higher, the greater the amounts of savings will be. That's why there is a positive relation between the two. Given that all the other factors affecting savings are steady, so for example, political and economic stability, the level of uncertainty in the economy, the willingness to consume or to save, what we call the marginal propensity to consume or to save. Given that all these variables are steady, we can draw a line for savings as a function of real income. That's what we will see in the next slide. Here you have the representation of the savings line. So on the vertical axis, real interest rates, and now on the horizontal axis, savings. So as I said before, there is a positive relation between real interest rates, the remuneration of savings, and how much money you save. So the higher interest rates paid on saving deposits, for example, or time deposits, the higher, the greater the amount of savings in the economy. That's what the line is telling you here. And there will be shifts in the line if any of the other factors or variables affecting savings changes. So say that there is more uncertainty in the economy, greater political or economic instability in the economy, or higher prices in the economy. In those cases, we will have a shift in the savings line. We move from a S0 here to S1, in this case is for the negative. There has been an increase in prices, and now our purchasing power is lower than before, so we don't have as much as we had before to save. So given that interest rates are steady, now we go from S0 savings to S1 savings with higher prices. So indeed, savings are determined by real variables, our real purchasing power. If prices are higher, we'll be willing to save less than before. And again, in this example, if the economy becomes more uncertain, there is more political instability, the representation of this phenomena will be exactly the same. A move of the line, a shift of the line to the left-hand side, and lower savings. In order to obtain the IS line, we will now try to get the combinations of real interest rates and real income for which savings are exactly equal to investment. That's what we're going to try to do in the next slide. So notice here that in point A, interest rates are very high and real income is very low. Whereas in point B, real interest rates are much lower and real income is much higher than before. So that's the relation that we need to summarize in a single diagram, and that I will show you in the next slide. If we connect those 2 points that I was referring to before, points A and B, in a single line, we reach to the IS line, which is a declining line with a level of real interest rates. So the lower borrowing costs are, the greater spending will be, and real income in the economy, which is here represented by Y for nominal income over P for the price level. That's very important for you to familiarize with this notation, because we're going to use it later in the module. So again, all these points along the line, along the green line, the IS line, represent points of equilibrium in the goods and services markets. Why equilibrium? Because total savings are exactly equal to investment. We are now going to study the components of the IS function in more detail. Here you have the equation of the IS function given by capital Y for income. That's going to be equal to the multiplier of spending times autonomous spending, that's a capital A bar, minus B times interest rates. B for the elasticity of investment spending to changes in interest rates. So the slope of the line is going to be given by the combination of both the multiplier of spending and B, the elasticity of investment to interest rates. And the position is going to be given by changes in autonomous spending in the economy. Here you have two scenarios, one in which the reaction of investment to changes in interest rates is very high, and the other one in which is not that high at all. That's why you have a flat IS line versus a much steeper IS line. So the same cut interest rates from I1 to I2 produces quite a different result in terms of investment spending and therefore the level of income in the economy. And why the IS curve is very relevant in order to analyze the effects of policies, economic policies. Well, it is very relevant in order to assess changes in fiscal policies, because if we add to the model not just private investment and private consumption, that's what we have done so far, but we include in autonomous spending capital G for government spending, including both public consumption and public investment, then any change in G in fiscal policies will be affecting the level of income in the economy. It will be producing a shift in the IS curve. If it is an addition of spending, a positive change to the right, and if it is a negative change, a shift to the left. If we also add to capital A bar, to autonomous spending, the foreign sector, the balance of the trade balance, for example, so NE for net exports, exports minus imports, now you have all the components of an open economy with a public sector. So now you can analyze and assess the effects of different trade policies and fiscal policies in the spending side of the economy via assessing changes in the IS curve. That's why it's so important. So how are we going to use the IS curve? Mainly to assess the effects of changes in capital G, in the level of government spending, in fiscal policy. Now we're going to introduce the second sector in the ISLM model, which is the monetary sector. This is going to be covered by the LM function. So the LM function is going to represent the combinations of interest rates, real interest rates, and real levels of income of equilibrium in monetary markets. So both the demand for money and the supply of money are going to be measured here under the assumption that changes do change. So in real terms, the notation is the one that I mentioned before. So capital MS for the supply of money over P for the price level. That will give you the total amount of money supplied to the economy in real terms. And this is going to be an exogenous variable, meaning that it's not going to be explained within the model. It's going to be given by another actor in the economy, in our case, the central bank. That's why it's going to be represented by a vertical line. As regards the demand for money, which is capital M, D for the demand for money over P for the price level. So the demand for money in real terms, or the demand for real balances, this is going to be an endogenous variable, which means that it's going to be explained within the model according to some variables. Which are they? By changes in interest rates and the levels of income in the economy. The LM function is determined by the two sides of the market, the monetary market, the demand for money and the supply of money. As regards the demand for money in real terms is M over P for the price level. It's explained by two major variables, the level of income in the economy and interest rates. Well, let's start with the level of income. The assumption here is that the higher the level of income in the economy, the higher the ability of people to engage in transactions, to buy more goods and services. Therefore, they will be demanding more monetary units in order to buy more. That's why there is a positive relation between the level of income and the demand for money in real terms. What about interest rates, or a representative long-term interest rate, let's say? Well, interest rates are the opportunity cost of holding money. Say that you have a spare income, you have different options as regards where or how to allocate your income. So you can invest it and you can buy government bonds or private bonds or equity, or even put your money in the bank in a saving account or a deposit account, and you will be earning some remuneration, sort of an interest rate paid on your balances. That's precisely the money that you are losing out should you keep all your spare income in your pockets. That's why the higher the level of that interest rate, the remuneration on savings, the lower your willingness to keep your spare income in your pocket in the form of money. That's why there is a negative relationship between the two. So here you have the representation of the demand for money as a declining line with the level of interest rates, precisely for the reasons that I explained before. So changes in interest rates will be changing your position along the same line. Say that there is a change in prices, say that prices are higher, as following the example here in the diagram. So the level of disposable income, real income, is lower. Your purchasing power has decreased just because prices are higher. So in this case, even for the same level of interest rates, your demand for money, for real balances, in real terms, will be lower than before. That's why we have a shift of the demand for money line from L liquidity 1 or demand for money 1 to L2 or MD2. Here you have the explanation on how we get the LM line. On the left-hand side of the slide, you have the representation of the demand for money, the red line, and the supply of money in the monetary markets. The supply of money, as I said before, is given by a vertical line. It's an exogenous variable. It's a fixed amount of money given by the central bank. That's why it's represented by M bar over P bar. And say that the level of income in the economy increases, so the demand for money, which is positively related to the level of income, shifts positively to the right. So we go from equilibrium E1 to equilibrium E2. So what we are seeing here is that a higher level of income requires a higher level of interest rates for the monetary market to clear. And why is that? Because the existing amount of money is the same as before. So more people are demanding more money. The amount of money becomes more scarce than before. So its price, as in any other commodity, will increase. So that will be reflected in an increase in interest rates. If we translate those combinations of interest rates and levels of income that clear the monetary market, we have the LM line here. And by definition, again, the LM line represents the combinations of interest rates and levels of income of equilibrium in the monetary market. Why it is important for economic policy purposes? Because any change in monetary policies, here represented by the vertical line on the left-hand side of the slide, will be having an impact in interest rates and also in the level of income. We'll see that in the next few slides. But remember that we are considering an ISLM model with flexible prices. So those changes in prices will have an impact in the supply of money in real terms. The numerator is the total volume, the total amount of money issued by the central bank. That's the nominal amount of money over P for the price level. So say that prices are higher. In that case, the purchasing power of the existing money, the numerator, will be lower. Therefore, the supply of money in real terms will fall. That's the way to read the total amount of money in the economy in real terms. We can use this very simple model of only two sectors, spending and the monetary sector, in order to represent the equilibrium in the economy. This is something we do here on the right-hand side of the slides, where you have the IS line, the green line, declining with the level of interest rates, and the first LM1 over P1 line. The intersection of both will give you the equilibrium, the first equilibrium in the economy, capital E1. And that will be the combination of interest rates and level of income, in which both the real sides of the economy, goods and services, and the monetary sides of the economy, the demand for money and the supply of money, are in equilibrium. So indeed, E1 is a first aggregate equilibrium in the economy, but again, in a very narrow or limited economy with only two sectors, spending and the monetary sector. What will happen if prices change? Because remember that we are adding price flexibility to this ISLM model. That's something we're going to investigate further on the left-hand side of the slide. So here you have the monetary market with the supply of money, MS over P, and the demand for money, the red line, declining with the level of interest rates. So starting from the first equilibrium, say that there is an increase in the price level. As I said before, now the numerator is the same as before. It hasn't changed. The total amount of money in the market is the same, but is divided by a higher price level, meaning that the purchasing power of money is lower than before. So in real terms, we are not in the first equilibrium anymore, but the supply of money in real terms has shifted to the left. There is less money in real terms. That's why we move from an equilibrium in which interest rates are at I1 to I2. Why? Because the demand for money is the same as before, but the supply of money in real terms is lower than before. And the same will happen with another increase in prices. We'll move up to a higher level of interest rates, I3. How will this be affecting the equilibrium, the overall equilibrium in the economy? Well, that's something that we need to analyze again on the right-hand side of the slide. So from equilibrium 1, now we go to equilibrium 2. And why is that? Because again, the central bank hasn't changed the amount of money in the economy. The numerator is the same as before, LM1, but prices are higher. So in real terms, effectively, there has been a contraction in the amount of money in the economy, which means that interest rates are higher and the level of income is lower than the initial. So that will happen even further if there is another increase in interest rates. So now prices are higher and so are interest rates, and the level of income will be even lower. That's why it's so important to analyze changes in monetary policy and changes in prices in this model by concentrating on what happens to the LM line, what happens to LM over P for prices. So just to summarize, the IS curve would be critical to analyze changes in fiscal policy decisions, while the LM curve will be the relevant one to analyze changes in monetary policy decisions. And in both cases, we need to see what happens to the price level and how the price level is affecting the total amount of money in real terms. Now we have introduced the basics of a very basic model with price flexibility that we can use to assess the effects of monetary and fiscal policies on major macroeconomic variables such as output, the level of income, or interest rates, for example. But it is important for you to remember that from now on, we'll be assessing the effects of these policies under real-life conditions. Hardly ever policies are made and designed under ideal conditions. By ideal, I mean a situation in which the policymaker has full information about the state of the economy and can make fully informed expectations about the future. Normally, decisions are made under much more difficult conditions, such as uncertainty. That's a very important hypothesis that we're going to take into account when assessing policies. You also need to remember that one option as regards the spectrum of policies a government or a central bank can implement is to do nothing. To be conservative, to do nothing is always one option. Sometimes, if you think that you're going to destabilize markets just because you don't have enough information about the effects of your policies, what is sensible to do is to do nothing. This is indeed a policy. Another thing you need to remember, and we're going to stress throughout the module, is that we will need to focus on the effects of fiscal and monetary policies on the medium to long term, because quite often, even though policymakers may not have taken them into account, there are unintended consequences of policies. So indeed, a well-intended policymaker may want to increase the level of output in the economy by injecting more and more money into the economy. Well, over time, if this is a consistent policies, there will be inflation expectations. Inflation will be higher. The purchasing power of income will be much lower, and people will be worse off. This would be an example of an unintended consequence of a policy. So that's something you very much need to remember. Which policies are we going to cover in the module? Well, there are many, but we are going to concentrate on mainly two, fiscal and monetary policies, but we will also mention the effects of changes in exchange rate policies. What have we learned so far? Well, first of all, we have summarized the very basics of the ISLM model, but we have also added something new, flexible prices. So we are now working under the hypothesis that there is no money illusion. People discount changes in prices in order to make their economic decisions. So this will very much allow us to assess the effects of changes in prices, either inflation or deflation, on the spending and monetary sectors in the economy, both represented by the IS and the LM functions respectively. And therefore we'll be able to assess the effects of changes in prices on the equilibrium of the economy. We will be adopting a sort of a building block approach to the construction of the extended ISLM model. So today we have started with a very basic ISLM model. We have added flexible prices, and in the next 2 lectures we'll be expanding the model to have more sectors and more flexible hypotheses. Therefore, I would ask you to send me an email in case you didn't understand something today, or because it's much better to stop me now because the model will get more complex in the next 2 weeks. And also we have set up, just mentioned, the conditions under which we are going to assess the effectiveness of monetary policies under real life scenarios, critically under uncertainty.